Okay, so today we will discuss the vertebral column, lumbar puncture and pelvimetry. Okay, so first we will discuss the vertebral column. So vertebral column, it resembles a carved rod. See here, this is the vertebral column. Don't talk, silence everyone. So this is the vertebral column. It resembles a carved rod and it composed of 33 vertebra and 23 intervertebral discs. Okay. So this column is divided into following 5 regions. This upper part 7 vertebra consists of 7 cervical vertebra, cervical region, 12 thoracic vertebra, thoracic region, 5 lumbar vertebra, lumbar region, and sacrum formed by fusion of 5 sacral vertebra. So, okay, so these are the 4, and here is 4 coccygeal vertebra forming the coccyx. Okay, so these are the regions of the vertebral column. So 24 of vertebra in the adult because of fusion of this sacral and coccygeal vertebrae. So C7, T12, L5 and 5 of the remaining 9 vertebrae is fused to form the sacrum and the remaining 4 constitute the coccyx. Okay. Next. Next, what are the curvatures? Curvatures of the spinal column. Primary curvatures are the original posterior convexity throughout the life are called the primary curvature. Okay, and the two curvatures developing later on in the thorax are known as the secondary curvatures. So primary curvatures, the secondary or lordotic curves develop as a result of the accommodation of the skeleton to the upright posture. The two curves are the cervical and lumbar curves that show a reversal of the original posterior convexity are called the secondary curvature. Okay. So cervical and lumbar, these are the two primary curvature and these are the two secondary curvature, thoracic and sacral, sacrococcygeal region. Next, what are the different parts of a typical vertebra? See, this is vertebral body. It has a pedicle on the two sides. These are the lamina. These are articular processes. These are the transverse process, and this is spinous process. These are the presenting part of a vertebra, and this is vertebral canal. So the anterior portion of a vertebra is called the vertebral body and the posterior portion of a vertebra is called the vertebral or neural arch, and the neural arch is divided into the pedicles and lamina. So this part is pedicle and these are the lamina. These are the processes, spinous process, transverse process, articular processes, superior and inferior articular processes are there. Okay, next. So these are the different parts. Body, arches. Arches are formed by the pedicle, lamina, transverse process, spinous process, and vertebral foramen. Okay. So vertebral bony system, there is a trabecular system that develops in response to the stresses placed on the vertebral bodies, and the neural arches are found within the spongy bone. Okay, so these are the trabeculae present in the vertebra. Okay, and the vertical systems within the vertebral bodies help support the body weight. Vertebral column carries the body weight and resists the compression forces. And there are also fan-shaped trabeculae introduced into the vertebral body at the area of the pedicle in response to bending and shearing forces transmitted through this region. Okay. So, in the vertebral column, there is flexion, extension, and lateral rotation, and also side bends. So, there is shearing forces are acting. So, to prevent all those forces, to prevent compression of the vertebra, these trabeculae are disposed in different directions. Next, Next we go to intervertebral disc. The intervertebral disc, okay, intervertebral discs, these are composed of three parts. The nucleus pulposus that is present in the center of the intervertebral disc, it is a gelatinous mass found in the center, and surrounding the nucleus pulposus are the annulus fibrosus, that is outer fibrous ring, and the vertebral end plate, it is a cartilaginous layer on the two sides. These are the end plates, cartilaginous layer covering the superior inferior surfaces of the disc, separating it from the cancellous bone of the vertebral body above and below, and it composed of water, collagen and proteoglycan. So these are the three parts of the intervertebral disc. Intervertebral disc can come as a short note, okay. And curvatures you will be asked in your viva table during the bones axial skeleton table. You will be asked the curvature, primary and secondary curvatures, how many vertebrae form the vertebral column, like this. All those are important questions for your viva. And intervertebral disc important for your theory. You practice a schematic diagram like this, and you prepare a short note. Next, what are the articulations of the vertebra? Two main articulations are there. Interbody or cartilaginous bonds in between the vertebral body and the disc. And diarthroidal or synovial joints, these are joints between the zygapophyseal facets located on the superior articular process of one vertebra and zygapophyseal facets of inferior articular process of adjacent vertebra. See this inferior articular process of upper vertebra articulating with superior articular process of the vertebra below, forming the synovial type of zygapophyseal joint. And this is the interbody joint, where it is articulating between the with the intervertebral disc. Okay, understood? Next, what are the movement allowed in the vertebral column? Generally, translations and rotations of one vertebra in relation to adjacent vertebra is allowed. Side to side translation or gliding movement occurs in the frontal plane. Superior and inferior translation, that is axial distraction and compression, occurs vertically. Antero-posterior translations occur in the sagittal plane. Side to side rotation or tilting in a frontal plane occurs around a antero-posterior axis, and rotation occurs in the transverse plane around a vertical axis. Antero-posterior rotation, that is tilting, occurs in the sagittal plane around a frontal axis. So these are the movements occurring in the interbody joints. Next, okay, so some facts about the intervertebral disc. Two principal functions are there of intervertebral disc: increasing available motion and to transmit load from one vertebral body to the next vertebra. These are the functions of the intervertebral disc. And the intervertebral disc, which make about 20% to 33% of length of vertebral column, increases size from cervical to lumbar regions. You can hear me on the last bench? You can hear me or not? Okay. So the disc thickness varies from approximately 3 millimeter in the cervical region, where the weight bearing loads are the lowest, to about 9 millimeter in the lumbar region, where the weight bearing loads are the highest. Okay. So from above downwards, thickness is increasing. And the discs are smallest in the cervical region, largest in the lumbar region. And the ratio between the disc thickness and vertebral body height that determines the available motion. The greater the ratio, the greater is the mobility. Ratio is greatest in the cervical region, followed by the lumbar region, and the ratio is smallest in the thoracic region. And this reflects the greater functional needs for mobility in the cervical and lumbar region and for stability in the thoracic region. Okay, in thoracic region, during inspiration and expiration, generally ribs are moving much. Okay, so for helping in this rib movement, vertebra should be stable enough. And for cervical and lumbar region, we need to bend the body in that regions. So movement is much effective in this cervical and lumbar regions. Okay, understood? Next. Next we go to ligaments and joint capsules. Important ligaments only we will discuss. So 6 main ligaments are associated with the intervertebral and jaggapophyseal joints, and these are the anterior and posterior longitudinal ligaments. See here, this is anterior longitudinal ligaments connecting the vertebral bodies in front. This is posterior longitudinal ligament connecting the vertebral bodies posteriorly. It is lying within the vertebral canal. Okay. Next is ligamentum flavum. Ligamentum flavum is connecting the laminas of the vertebra, and interspinous, supraspinous and intertransverse ligament. Interspinous and supraspinous ligament, they are connecting the tip of the spine. Supraspinous ligament is connecting the tip of the spine of cervical vertebra, and interspinous ligament connecting tip of other vertebrae. Okay, and intertransverse ligament, they are connecting the transverse processes of the vertebra. So these are the important ligaments of these different joints in the vertebral column. Next, anterior longitudinal ligament. See here, this is anterior longitudinal ligament. It is slack and may be compressed in forward flexion of the vertebral column. See here, in forward flexion, this ligament is bent, and the anterior longitudinal ligament is stretched in extension of the vertebral column. Here in extension, it is stretched. Okay, and posterior longitudinal ligament. See, this is posterior longitudinal ligament. This is in flexion, it is stretched, and in extension, it is in relaxed position or slack. Okay. Ligament is slack and may be compressed during extension, and posterior longitudinal ligament is stretched during forward flexion of the vertebral column. Okay, you can understand from the picture. Next, these are the movements allowed. Okay, so flexion and extension. So the intervertebral disc allows the vertebra to tilt, which dramatically increase the range of motion at the interbody joint. So this is flexion, this is normal condition, and posterior bending is the extension. Flexion, extension is allowed. Without an intervertebral disc, only translatory motions could occur. Okay, that means gliding movement side to side only. Okay, so for proper flexion and extension of the vertebral column, we need proper functioning of the intervertebral disc. Next, lateral flexion and rotation. The superior vertebra tilts laterally and rotates over the adjacent vertebra below during the lateral flexion. And the lateral flexion and rotation of the vertebra are limited by tension in the intertransverse ligament on the convexity of the curve. Okay, so the ligaments restrict excessive movements. Okay, next. So we have discussed the normal structures of the vertebral column. Okay, now we will go to the deformities of the vertebral column. These are important theory questions. Okay, also you will get this theory question in your orthopedics in final year. Okay, so these are the important spinal deformities. All of them can come as a short note. First is scoliosis, kyphosis, lordosis, torticollis and flat back. All these we will discuss. First we will discuss scoliosis. Next, scoliosis is defined as lateral deviation of the normal vertical line of the spine. That means side bend. The lateral curvature of the spine also is associated with rotation of the vertebra. Next, what is the etiology? Normally, it is vertically placed. The vertebral column vertically placed. If there is sideward bend, that is known as scoliosis. Okay. So, etiology may be congenital, that is underlying bony malformation, neuromuscular, syndromic, or idiopathic. All these are etiology. Next, so in case of scoliosis, in all these bony elements are disturbed. So vertebra are wedge-shaped, poorly developed concave side, and pedicle is rotated. See here, pedicle is rotated to this side. Okay, so there is asymmetry on the two sides. Next, these are the different types of scoliosis. Infantile scoliosis occurs from birth to 3 years of age. Juvenile idiopathic scoliosis occurs between age of 4 to 10 years. Next is adolescent idiopathic scoliosis occurs between 10 years of age and skeletal maturity. Idiopathic is the most common region of scoliosis. Okay. Next, see here, there is curve in the vertebral column, lateral curvature, that is normally not present. So, these are the signs of scoliosis. Two shoulders are not in same horizontal plane. Uneven shoulders, there will be curve in the spine and there is uneven hips. Okay, two sides of the hip, they are not in the same horizontal plane. So, that's how you diagnose scoliosis. Next, infantile idiopathic scoliosis. This is the most common cause. Okay, so it is structural lateral curvature of the spine occurring in patients younger than 3 years of age, and most are self-limiting and spontaneously resolve in 70 to 90% cases. You have to do only postural correction in case of the child, and some curves may be progressive and usually increasing, result in significant deformity and pulmonary impairment. Okay, due to this bending of the spine, lung development will also be hampered because one side is compressed, it has less space. That's why there will be pulmonary impairment can also occur if the significant curvature is present. Next, okay. So the Cobb angle is a radiological measurement that defines the severity and helps to guide the treatment. So we have to we have to take a line from the beginning of the curve and one line from the end of the curve and draw perpendicular to each of the line, and the angle formed between these perpendicular lines, this angle is known as Cobb angle. Okay. Next, so curves less than 20 degree do not need treatment. Progressive curves of 25 to 40 degree may be treated, may be braced, and those more than 40 degree are considered for surgery, and which involves instrumenting the spine and fusing it in some parts. Back pain is associated with scoliosis, may be due to infection or tumor. Okay. Next, juvenile idiopathic scoliosis. That previous one was infantile. Okay. Next, we go to juvenile, 4 to 10 years. It was found that 67% of patients younger than age 10 years showed curve progression. Risk of progression was 100% in patients younger than 10 years and who had curves of more than 20 degrees. Okay. Next, and for curves less than 20 degree, observation indicates that with examination and standing PA radiograph, every 4 to 6 months you have to take the X-ray, and evidence of progression on the radiographs as indicated by chance of 5 to 7%. And there is only brace treatment for this less than 20%, 20 degrees. Next, success of non-operative treatment is variable from 27% to 56%, and require spinal fusion for progressive disease. And if found that patients who wore a brace part time after school or at night had good outcomes. Okay, non-operative means this brace treatment. Okay, and patients with curvatures of greater than 45 degrees at the onset of bracing all eventually went spinal fusion. Okay, due to wearing the brace for a long time, there will be spontaneous spinal fusion in some cases. Next, another important consideration is crankshaft phenomenon with a solid posterior fusion. Continued anterior growth of the vertebral bodies causes the vertebral body and discs to bulge laterally towards the convexity, causing loss of correction, increase in vertebral rotation, and recurrence of the rib hump. Next, there is a picture here. This is crankshaft phenomenon, fusion in the posterior part of the vertebral bodies. That is not much important. Next, adolescent idiopathic scoliosis is present when the spine deformity is recognized after the child is 10 years of age, but before the skeletal maturity. And most common type of idiopathic scoliosis is this type, adolescent idiopathic. Next, these are the main etiological factors: genetic factor, neurologic disorders, hormonal and metabolic dysfunctions, skeletal growth deformity, environmental and lifestyle factors. Lifestyle factors mean maintaining proper posture. Okay. Next, so the effect of progressive curves on adults with unaffected scoliosis has been studied by several investigators, and four considerations you have to take: if there is back pain or not, pulmonary function is normal or not, curve progression in the lumbar and thoracolumbar curves, and motility is more than thoracic curves greater than 100 degrees with resultant cor pulmonale. Okay, you have to consider these 4 points before going for any surgery or any kind of treatment. Next, this is Adams forward bending test. Okay, scoliometer for measurement of the bending. Less than 7 degree is normal. Next, so we have completed scoliosis. Okay, so scoliosis is sideward bend of the vertebral column. Okay, remember this, and different types of scoliosis according to the age. Adolescent one is most common. Next, we go to kyphosis. Kyphosis in the sagittal plane, normal spine has four balanced curved. The cervical spine is lordotic, thoracic spine is kyphotic. Kyphotic means there is concavity in front and convexity posteriorly. So, with the curve extending from T2 or T3 to T12 level, and the lumbar region is lordotic, that is 31 to 79 degree, and the sacral curve is kyphotic. On standing, the thoracic kyphosis and lumbar lordosis are balanced. Okay. Next, kyphosis of 50 degrees or more in the thoracic spine usually is considered abnormal, and kyphotic deformity may occur if the anterior spinal column is unable to withstand the compression, causing shortening of the anterior column. Okay. Next, these are the three types of kyphosis: postural kyphosis, Shortman kyphosis, and congenital kyphosis. These are the three main types. Next, so first is postural kyphosis. It is most common type, more common in girls. It is caused by weakening of the muscles and poor posture, and it progressively gets worse with time. And these people will have symptoms of pain and muscle fatigue. Okay. Next, Shorman kyphosis. It is a structural sagittal plane deformity in the thoracic or the thoracolumbar spine, and patient have an increased kyphosis in the thoracolumbar spine with associated diagnostic radiographic changes. Next, normal thoracic kyphosis is generally accepted to be between 20 to 45 degree, and the degree of kyphosis in the thoracic spine increases with age. Kyphosis should never be present at the thoracolumbar junction, and any kyphotic deformity present at this level is considered abnormal. Okay, so that's how you diagnose kyphosis. Next, clinically, most patients with thoracic Shorman kyphosis present with pain. 80% of patients have pain and usually intermittent in nature, and it is characterized by dull aching and is generally activity related and relieved by rest. Okay. Next, on physical examination, the patients with upper thoracic Shorman disease present with a kyphotic deformity. See here, in forward bending, there is a hump-like structure you will see over the spine, and it is best demonstrated in forward flex position. Okay, upper thoracic Shorman's kyphosis is there. Next, radiographic diagnosis, irregularities of the vertebral end plates, anterior vertebral body wedging, and decreased intervertebral disc space height. So these are the points you have to see in X-ray plates. Okay. Next, non-operative treatment. First is observation. Adolescents with mildly increased kyphosis of less than 50 degrees without evidence of progression can be evaluated with repeated standing lateral radiograph every 4 to 6 months. Okay, so this is the investigation of choice. Next, operative treatment when it is needed. Indications are progressive kyphosis of more than 75 degrees, significant kyphosis associated with pain, and it is not alleviated by conservative treatment methods. Pain is not alleviated. That's why you have to consider operative surgeons. Next, the biomechanical principle of correction of kyphosis include lengthening the anterior column, that is known as anterior release, providing anterior support interbody fusion, and shortening and stabilizing the posterior column by compression instrumentation and arthrodesis. Okay, so this is the operation. Next, so we have discussed kyphosis and its three varieties. So kyphosis is backward bending, okay, of the spine. Scoliosis was sideward bending of the spine. Next we go to lordosis. Lordosis, it is an inward curvature of a portion of lumbar and cervical vertebral column. Okay, lordosis is normally present in cervical and lumbar region. When it is increased, then it is a disease condition. Okay, so it may be due to achondroplasia and spondylolisthesis. We'll discuss it. It is associated with poor posture, a congenital problem with vertebra, neuromuscular problem, and back surgery. In children, rickets may lead to lordosis. Ricket is due to vitamin D deficiency. Okay, next. See here, this is normal lordosis of the lumbar region, but here is exaggerated lumbar curve, that is known as lordosis of the spine. So, what are the clinical features? There will be prominence of the buttock, there will be back pain and pain radiating to the lower limb. It is due to decreasing the diameter of the vertebral canal, and there will be nerve compression. That's why there will be pain. Okay. Next, what is the treatment? Based on child's age, overall health, medical history, cause and extension of the condition, goal of the treatment is to stop the progression of the curve and prevent the deformity. Simple exercises are sufficient. And if lordosis is associated with poor posture, you have to do posture correction. Next we go to spondylolisthesis. It defines a defect in the pars interarticularis of the vertebra. And there are 6 types: congenital spondylosis, that is known as dysplastic facet joints, isthmic, weak or elongated pars, degenerative type, post-traumatic, pathological, and post-surgical. All are the different types of spondylosis. And what is spondylosis? Defect in the pars interarticularis of the vertebra. Next, see here, this is pars interarticularis. Interarticularis means joint between the superior and inferior articular processes. That joint is known as pars interarticularis. So, if there is defect in these joints, there will be spondylosis. Pars defect is a condition affects the lumbar spine, causing low back pain. Particularly affects the area of bone called pars intercularis in the spinal vertebra here. Okay. Next we go to spondylolisthesis. Occurs when the upper vertebra slips forward on the lower one, and it is graded according to the percentage of the slip and measured by relating the slipped vertebra to one below. Okay. So next, okay, previous one, आगे जाओ. Okay, spondylolisthesis is slipping of the upper vertebra over the lower one. So there will be grading according to the distance of slipping forward. Okay, more slipping forward, there will be more pressure over the nerves, there will be more pain. Okay, so you have to correct with operation in severe pain. There the operation is mainly plate fixation with screws. Okay. Next we go to torticollis. Okay, torticollis, head is tilted towards and rotated away from the tight sternocleidomastoid muscle. Here, right sided torticollis. Right ear is tilts towards the right shoulder. Tight right sternocleidomastoid muscle, and nose and face rotates to the opposite side, to the left side. Next, there are 2 types of torticollis: congenital torticollis, acquired torticollis. Next, congenital torticollis occurs due to intrauterine molding, sternocleidomastoid contracture, a palpable tumor. There is a strong correlation with dysplasia of the hip joint. Okay, and most cases resolve with stretching, but persistent cases develop facial asymmetry and require surgical release of the sternocleidomastoid at one or both ends. Okay. Next, acquired torticollis is less common and may be caused by gastroesophageal reflux, posterior fossa tumor, regional abnormality, inflammation or infection, ocular problems, or atlantoaxial rotatory subluxation. These are the causes of acquired torticollis. Okay. Next. Okay, so we have completed all the spinal defects. Okay. Next we go to lumbar puncture. Lumbar puncture, very frequently given theory question. Comes as a short note, you prepare as a short note. As a short note or part of the long question you can come. Okay, lumbar puncture. What is the definition of lumbar puncture? Lumbar puncture is also known as spinal tap. It is carried out by inserting a needle into the lumbar subarachnoid space to withdraw CSF. Okay, cerebrospinal fluid. For collecting CSF, you have to do lumbar puncture or spinal tap. Next, What are the purposes? When do we have to collect CSF? To obtain CSF for analysis and diagnosis of meningitis, meningoencephalitis, subarachnoid hemorrhage, malignancy diagnosis and treatment, pseudotumor cerebri, and other neurological syndromes. In all these cases, you need to do CSF spinal tap. Okay, to drain CSF and reduce intracranial tension reduce tension in the intracranial space in case of hydrocephalus, and to instill medications in case of children. Okay, you directly instill medication in the subarachnoid space. Next, what are the contraindications of spinal tap? Okay, increase intracranial pressure, head CT before study if focal neurological findings present to rule out impending cerebral mass herniation. Okay, if you do a spinal tap in case of increased intracranial pressure patients, the cerebral peduncles will herniate through the spinal canal, through the foramen magnum. Okay, uncal herniation occurs mainly, so there will be problem if herniation of brain occurs through the foramen magnum. If platelet count is less than 40,000 and prothrombin time is less than 50% of control. If there is less platelet, uh, blood clotting will be not proper. So if you injure, you have to pierce through the muscles and vessels to enter into the subarachnoid space. So there will be bleeding, and bleeding will not stop if the platelet count is less than 40,000. Okay. Next, in hydrocephalus, enlarged ventricle in size and in suspected normal pressure hydrocephalus, you have to do lumbar puncture, okay, to release tension. And in coma patient, if CT is negative and intracranial pressure is increased, okay, in CT scan you are not getting anything, and if the intracranial pressure is increased, to release the pressure you have to do lumbar puncture. And in meningitis, to exclude mass lesion and confirm the diagnosis, you have to measure the sugar level and different enzyme levels in the CSF. That's how you diagnose different diseases. Next, what is the technique? Use a smallest possible gauge. 20 gauge to 22 gauge needle is used. Prefer atraumatic needles rather than cutting needle. 1.5 in inches for less than 1 year, 2.5 inch in for 1 year to middle childhood, 3.5 inch in for older children and adolescents, and larger for larger adolescents. Okay, so these are 25 gauge needles. These are used for different varieties of lumbar puncture needles. Next, where you will insert the needle. This is very important, asked in your viva. Yes. Atraumatic means it is not that much sharp. Okay, it will pierce through fascias or like this, but not pierce through muscles. It cannot cut all the structures. Atraumatic means. Okay. Insertion of needle. Needle is inserted into subarachnoid space through the intervertebral space. See here, the needle has been pushed into the subarachnoid space through the intervertebral space. Okay, and it is done in at the L4 L5 level or L3 L4, because spinal cord is extending up to the L1 vertebral level. So to prevent injury to the spinal cord, we do it at the vertebral junction between L3 L4 or L4 L5. Okay. Next, position of the patient. Spinal cord ends at L1 L4, lumbar puncture is L3 L4 and L4 L5. Restrain the patient in lateral decubitus position. Place the patient in lateral decubitus position. Maximally flex the spine without compromising the airway. Okay, head and knees are coming close to each other. Okay, that's why these intervertebral spaces will be dilated. So it will be helpful to introduce the needle. So keep alignment of feet, knee and hip. Position the head to left if handed or vice versa. Okay. Okay, so in left decubitus position is preferred if the doctor is right-handed. Okay. Next, equipment is sterile CSF tray with spinal needle. Anesthetic used are topical anesthetic can be used. Xylocaine cream or lidocaine 1% injection with 25 gauge needle and syringe. Povidone iodine solution sponge for cleaning the area. Drapes, gauze, and bandages are used. After the procedure, you have to you have to tape this area with gauze and bandages. Manometer used to measure CSF pressure. Stopcock, tubing, and specimen bottles for collecting the CSF. All these are needed. Next, pre-procedure, you have to obtain a written consent from the patient. Explain the procedure to the patient. Determine whether patient have any doubts or misconceptions about the procedure. Reassure the patient that no harm will be caused. Okay, and instruct the patient to void after the procedure. Next. Next, position the patient at one side of the edge of the bed. Place a small pillow under patient's head and another between the legs. Assist the patient to maintain the position. Encourage patient to relax and to breathe normally. Can describe the procedure to the patient. Next, physician cleans the site with antiseptic solution, povidone iodine solution, and drapes the site. Drape with these drapings. And local anesthetic is injected if needed to numb the site, and a spinal needle is inserted to the subarachnoid space with stylet with beveled up to keep the course of the needle. Okay. After entering into subarachnoid space, you have to remove the stylet and CSF will come out through the needle. Next, specimen of CSF is collected usually in 3 test tubes. Needle is withdrawn and a small dressing is applied at the puncture site. Send the specimen to the lab immediately. Okay. Next, instruct the patient to lie on prone position for 2 to 3 hours. Monitor the patient for any complications. Encourage increased fluid intake. Okay, so these are the post procedure we have to do. Next, what are the complications can occur due to lumbar puncture? There may be headache or back pain occasionally with short-lived. Back pain is not last for much time. Disc herniation if needle advanced too far. Bleeding or fluid leak around the spinal cord. Infection, pain, hematoma. These are long-term complications. Subarachnoid epidermal cyst. These are prolonged. This occurs prolonged time after lumbar puncture. Ocular muscle palsy in 1% cases. Nerve trauma and brain stem herniation. Okay. These are the complications of the spinal tap. Next, post lumbar puncture headache is throbbing headache, bifrontal and occipital headaches occur. Dull and deep in character, severe on sitting or standing. Okay, so you recommend the patient to lie down in prone position for 2 to 3 hours after the procedure. And it can be avoided by using a small gauze needle. Keep the patient prone after procedure for 2 hours and then side lying for 2 to 3 hours and then supine or prone for 6 or more hours. Okay. So patient have to keep in bed for almost 8 to 10 hours. Okay. Next, what is the management of this pain? Bed rest, analgesic, hydration, and epidural blood patch. Next, CSF analysis. You have to see CSF is generally clear and colorless. Okay, if hemorrhage is occurring, you will see reddish discoloration. Okay, and in case of jaundice, you will if the it crosses the blood-brain barrier, there will be yellowish discoloration of the CSF. So you have to note down the color of the CSF and whether it is clear or not. In TB meningitis or any other meningitis or other infectious diseases, there will be CSR may not be clear. It may be turbid and there may be some deposits, okay, in the collected specimen. And it is secreted by choroid plexus, exists in the subarachnoid space, about 150 to 200 ml. This is the normal amount of CSF present in our body, acts as a shock absorber around the brain and spinal cord and transmutes the nutrition. This is the function of CSF. Next, if CSF is blood test, 3 sample has to be collected, uniformly stained. If the 3 samples are uniformly stained, it is subarachnoid hemorrhage. If CSF clears in third bottle, it is traumatic tap. You have injured one blood vessel during the tap. That's why first one was bloody. Okay. Yes. Choroid plexus is present within the ventricles of the brain. You will see during the brain classes, in ventricle classes. Okay. It helps. It is the area where the CSF is secreted. Okay. Next, standard test usually obtained for cell count, culture, glucose and protein testing. These are mainly done for CSF. Culture, if there is any infection, cell count is increased in different infections, and white blood cell count is increased mainly in infections. RBC count infection if hemorrhage occurs within the subarachnoid space. RBC and differential WBC count is mainly done. Bacteriological, gram stain and culture. Culture for detection antibiotic, which antibiotic is working, and gram stain you have to do for tuberculosis, okay, and other bacteria. And biochemical test, normally CSF protein is this 0.15 to 0.45 gram per liter and glucose is 0.45 to 0.70 gram per dl. Okay, so if the values are deranged, there is different diseases. Some disease glucose is reduced, in some disease protein is increased, like this happens. Okay, so according to changing of these biochemical parameters, we have to diagnose the disease. Next, okay, so for different diseases, what kind of infection is there, you have to see. Subarachnoid hemorrhage, spectrophotometry you have to do. Malignant tumor cytology, in tuberculosis, PCR, polymerase chain reaction, Jensen's culture is done. In non-bacterial infection, virology, fungal and parasitic studies you have to do. Demyelinating diseases, oligoclonal bands, you have to see. Neurosyphilis, VDRL test. Cryptococcus, you have to do culture and antigen detection. HIV, you have to do culture, antigen detection and antiviral antibody tests. Okay. Next, okay, so we have completed CSF. Lumbar puncture, its indications, contraindication, procedure, and after collection, what test you have to do for different diseases like this. Okay. So you prepare lumbar puncture for a short note. Understood? Next we go to pelvimetry. We are starting abdomen. Abdomen has started now. Okay, so for abdomen you have to know the pelvimetry. Different diameters in the pelvis. There is true pelvis and false pelvis. Okay, diameters are there in the inlet, cavity and outlet. So some important diameter that is important for cephalopelvic disproportion. That means fetal head will pass through the pelvis. There is chance of normal labor or not. To know all these things, you have to know the diameters of the pelvis. And there is difference in diameters in males and females. Okay. And types of pelvis are also different for males and females. So pelvimetry is measurement of the pelvis. Next, pelvimetry gives information of the measurement of female pelvis, where to find where the pelvic cavity is capable for normal process of birth or not. Okay. Next, what is the purpose of pelvimetry? Whether you have to consider whether there is cephalopelvic disproportion. Cephalopelvic means the pelvic cavity corresponds with the fetal head. Okay. Cephalopelvic disproportion to allow the fetus to pass through the birth canal. Okay. So you can see here the fetal haze is entering into the pelvis before birth. This entering into the pelvis, this is station 0, interspinous level. You can see the spinous process. Okay. Spinous processes ischial spine of the ischium. The plane passing through the ischial spine is the interspinous plane, and this is 0 station for the fetus. Above this 0 station, 1 centimeter is +1, 2 centimeter +2, 3 centimeter is +3, like this. Okay. And if the fetal head is entered below this upper end of pelvis, then it is called the head is engaged within the pelvis. And below this level is -1, -2, -3, according to 1, 2 and 3 centimeter below this interspinous level. Okay. Next. So 3P you have to consider during the labor. P is passenger. Passenger is the fetus. Passageway is the childbirth canal. And power of the labor is force of uterine contraction. It will push the fetus through the pelvic cavity. Okay. Next, bony pelvis is divided into 2 parts, false pelvis and true pelvis. False pelvis is above the inlet, true inlet of the pelvis. It contains the pelvic organs and bones below the pelvic brim, and true pelvis is above the pelvic brim. It is opposite actually. Below the pelvic brim is true pelvis, above the pelvic brim is the false pelvis. Okay, understood? Next. See, this is pelvic inlet and this is pelvic brim. Okay. So this part which is containing this iliac fossa, these are the part of the false pelvis. And this part below this pelvic inlet, this part is forming the true pelvis. So what are the parts forming the pelvic inlet? This is very frequently asked question in your viva table. From anterior to posterior, it is symphysis pubis, then pubic crest, then pubic tubercle. Then there is arcuate line. Arcuate line is formed by the pectinate line, iliopubic eminence. Okay. And here is the sacroiliac joint and ala of the sacrum and sacral promontory. All these things are forming one side of the pelvic inlet. Same things are repeated on the opposite side. Okay, understood? So this is boundary of pelvic inlet. Very, very important viva question. Tell me the structures forming the pelvic inlet. From anterior to posterior or posterior to anterior, you have to say. Okay, understood? Next. See, this is pubic crest and this is anterior superior iliac spine, posterior superior iliac spine. This is pubic tubercle and this is highest point. Through the highest point passes the intercristal plane, and through the tubercle, that is 5 centimeter posterior to the anterior superior iliac spine, through the iliac tubercle passes the intertubercular plane of the pelvis. Okay, understood? Next. This is sacroiliac joint. Here is the coccyx. This is sacrum. Two iliac bones, ilium, ischium and pubis, head of the femurs are articulating here. Next, these are important diameters. Transverse diameter of pelvic inlet. Here is the transverse diameter. At the maximum point, maximum distant point, you measure the transverse diameter of the inlet. The iliopubic lines at the widest transverse distance is the transverse diameter of pelvic inlet. It is about 13 to 14.5 centimeter. Okay, this is the range. And in fetal head engages in this transverse diameter of the pelvic inlet. Next, interspinous distance. Interspinous distance between two ischial spines. Line between the closest bony points of the ischial spine. Normal range is 9.5 to 11.5 centimeter. Okay, understood? This is the smallest distance within the pelvic cavity. That's why it is important. If the fetal head can cross through this distance, it can pass whole of the passage. Okay. Next, intertuberous diameter in between the two ischial tuberosities. Closest, this is the diameter of the outlet. Okay, so first one was transverse diameter of the inlet. Interspinous diameter is diameter of the smallest diameter of the pelvic cavity, and this is diameter of the outlet, intertuberous diameter. Okay, ischial in between the two ischial tuberosity. Normal range is 10 to 12 centimeter. Next, so here pelvic cavity has been shown. It is bounded posteriorly by the sacral concavity, anteriorly by the posterior surface of the body of pubis and symphysis pubis, and laterally by the pubis, ischium and some part of the ilium. Okay, understood? So these are forming the boundary. And on the laterally lying this obturator foramen and this greater and lesser sciatic notches, ischial spine, ischial tuberosity, all are forming the boundaries of the pelvis. Next, sagittal pelvic outlet. This is the sagittal pelvic outlet. Bony points of sacrococcygeal joint. Here is sacrococcygeal joint and the pubic bone next to the symphysis pubis. Here, this is the sagittal pelvic outlet diameter. Normal range is 9.5 to 11.5 centimeter. Intertuberous diameter, closest bony point of ischial tuberosity, this is 10 to 12 centimeter. Okay. Next, sagittal pelvic outlet diameter, bony point of sacrococcygeal joint and pubic bone next to the symphysis pubis. Normal range is 9.5 to 11.5. And what is obstetric conjugate of pelvic inlet? This is line between the closest bony point of sacral promontory and pubic bone next to the symphysis. That is normal range is 10 to 12 centimeter. Okay. In parvaginal examination, you can measure this obstetric conjugate. Okay. And from the obstetric conjugate, you can determine whether cephalopelvic disproportion is present or not. Okay. So it is measuring from lower margin of this symphysis pubis up to upper margin of sacral promontory. So this diameter will be the obstetric conjugate of pelvic inlet. Okay, understood? Next. Okay. Inlet, cavity and outlet. This is normal. Okay, this is average normal for all this. This is average total and this is low normal. So for you read the diameters for inlet, cavity and outlet, anteroposterior diameter, transverse diameter and oblique diameter. All three are important for all the three levels, inlet, outlet and cavity. Okay. Next, there are different types of pelvis are present in our. Okay, so first is gynecoid pelvis. This is female pelvis. Okay, female pelvis, it is anterior posteriorly oval mainly. Next is platypoid pelvis. This is transversely oval. And android pelvis is heart shaped. This is male pelvis. Okay. And anthropoid pelvis, it is anteroposteriorly elongated, but it is more elongated than the gynecoid pelvis. Okay. So in all, only in gynecoid pelvis there is chance of normal labor. Okay. But in all other types of pelvis, if they are present in female, there will be less chance for normal labor and there will be cesarean section. Okay, understood? So that's why you have to know different types of pelvis. This is important. Inlet, outlet, cavity diameters and these different types of pelvis. You prepare it for a short note. Okay, understood? So pelvimetry is important uh, for uh, for those determining whether it is cephalopelvic disproportion is present or not. Okay, understood? And interspinous level is the level 0. It is the narrowest part of the pelvis. Station G, above it is the +1, +2, +3. Below will be -1, -2, -3. This is the stations of labor in different phases of labor. Okay, understood? Okay, next. Okay, that's all. Any queries? Okay, so spinal column, you have to read for Viva and prepare the abnormalities. Kyphosis, scoliosis, lordosis, torticollis, all those can come as a short note. Pelvimetry, you prepare for short note. Okay, and lumbar puncture also very important short note. Lumbar puncture very frequently given short note.